of recent events in the United Kingdom and in relation to the planned broadcast on your platform, X, of a live conversation between a U.S. presidential candidate and yourself. So think about it. The guy in Europe in charge of enforcing a European Union law writes an American about an American company, about an American election, and he says the context for the letter, the reason for the letter, are events that are happening in the UK, a non-European Union country. That's not Europe trying to influence what happens here. I don't know what is. He goes on throughout the letter and says this: measures need to be taken to combat disinformation. He said this to Mr. Musk. We're concerned about any, quote, illegal content you may have. And he ends his letter by saying, my services and I, very last sentence, my services and I will be extremely vigilant to any evidence that points to breaches of the Digital Services Act and will not hesitate to make full use of our toolbox. So he ends the letter with a threat. So before the interview even takes place, he's threatening an American running an American company about an interview regarding the most important election we have, election of the President of the United States. And again, saying the reason for doing so are events that are happening in a non-European Union country, the UK. Comments about events happening in the UK. Concerned about this, quote, spillover effect. That is why we're having today's hearing. That's why we went to Europe last month, or actually in July, to study this issue. Now, here's what's interesting. Mr. Breton, after he sends this letter, this committee sent him 2 letters, and then he suddenly resigns. We asked him to come today, but he refused to come. We asked him to send written testimony. He refused to do that. We asked him to appear. He refused. He just wouldn't come. I think it's important to remember what the House Judiciary Committee did last Congress. We investigated our government, the Biden administration, their attacks on free expression here in the United States. What Michael Schellenberger journalists called the censorship industrial complex. Big government, big tech, big media, big academia, all working together to censor Americans. And we learned all kinds of things in that investigation. We learned on April 27th of 2022 that the Biden administration had established a disinformation governance board. That's right, a bunch of bureaucrats going to get together and tell you what you can say, what you can tweet, what you can post, what you can read, what's misinformation, what's disinformation, and the new term they come up, what's malinformation. Thank goodness, because many of us raised concerns about that, they disbanded that disinformation governance board. We no longer had that. We heard from journalists like Mr. Schellenberger, like Matt Taibbi, regarding the Twitter files. We heard from Tulsi Gabbard. We heard from RFK Jr., all Democrats, frankly. In fact, I took some heat for that. What are you doing bringing Democrats in front of the judiciary? We brought them in because they care about the First Amendment. It was interesting. When RFK Jr. came in to testify, the Democrats actually made a motion to go to executive session. Kick everyone out. No journalists, no one was allowed. They wanted to kick everyone out, go to executive session so no one could hear what RFK Jr. was going to testify to in a hearing on censorship. You can't make this stuff up. We learned that on January 23rd. Think about that, by the way. We learned on January 23rd, 2021, maybe point this one out first, that there was an email. So the third day of the Biden administration, there was an email sent from the White House to Twitter which said, take down this tweet ASAP. And who had issued the tweet? Who had put out the tweet? RFK Jr. So you had the Biden administration trying to censor a fellow Democrat who was going to run against him in the Democrat primary. I mean, that is, and everything in that tweet actually were true statements. So we learned all that last year, and of course our investigation culminated with a letter from Mr. Zuckerberg on August 26, 2024 last year, where he said, yes, the Biden administration pressured us to censor, we did it, we're sorry, and we won't do it again. And Meta, Facebook, has now subsequently changed policy. They now go to the community notes policy instead of the, quote, independent fact-checker approach that was being used before. We had one other witness last Congress, journalist from Canada, Rupa Subramanya, who I thought said something that was really important. She said, free speech is a core value of Western culture. And that is true, and that's what our concern is. We're concerned about the attacks on free expression in Europe, the censorship, the arrest for offensive posts, the chilling effect it all has on speech, but we're more concerned, frankly, as Americans about the limits the DSA, the Online Safety Act in the UK, put on Americans' First Amendment rights, and the shakedown, and I think that's the appropriate term, the shakedown of American tech companies under the DSA, the OSA, and the Digital Marketing Act Digital Markets Act in the European Union. These acts target our tech companies that provide the modern town square, and they are the engines of innovation in our global economy. Since the turn of the century, European tech companies have languished behind their American counterparts. European governments have tried everything to change this except what might actually work, deregulating their own economy and letting free enterprise flourish. Instead of cutting red tape and allowing their own companies to innovate and grow, the EU and the UK are going after American companies that have grown to dominate the global tech landscape. Regulations like the EU's Digital Markets Act and the UK's Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act impose burdensome requirements on US tech companies while leaving their European counterparts untouched. But these attacks on American companies won't result in a so-called European champion. Instead, China wins as Europe hurts both itself and America. They make the user experience worse. They distort the digital marketplace by allowing less innovative and less efficient foreign competitors to simply steal from US tech companies. In addition to attacking American tech companies, Europe is attacking free speech around the world, including here in America. Laws like the Digital Services Act and the Online Safety Act are the engines of global censorship regime targeting political speech disfavored by European bureaucrats. The censorship mechanism is simple. The DSA and the OSA effectively require social media platforms to change their terms of service to moderate more content. These companies have one set of standards that they apply globally because it's costly, impractical, and harmful to user privacy to change content moderation rules based on the user's location. So when platforms are forced to change their terms of service to comply with European laws, it affects what we see, what we read, what we say online here in America, infringing on Americans' First Amendment rights. And this is no accident. Even the New York Times, The Atlantic have acknowledged that these foreign censorship laws are intended to have global impact. And European actions have proven it. Again, just look at Mr. Breton's letter. Supporters say these laws make the online environment safer for children, something that we all agree with. We all want to protect kids. But censorship laws are never about disinformation or child safety or anything else. They're always about censoring criticism of the government. Social media is a relatively new technology, but censorship is as old as time. Misinformation, disinformation, hate speech labels are always used by the people in power to censor their critics. And my experience has taught me that today's misinformation is tomorrow's truth. And we have seen it time and time again. I always like to point out, everything the government told us about COVID turned out to be wrong. Everything our government told us about COVID. I'm not even talking about Europe here. Everything. They told us that the virus didn't come from a lab. Sure looks like it did. They told us it wasn't gain-of-function research done at the lab. Yes, it was. They told us it wasn't our tax money used at the lab. Yes, it was. They told us vaccines. They told us that the vaccinated can't get it. They told us the vaccinated can't transmit it. They told us masks work. They told us 6 feet social distance was based on science. And they told us this was the first virus in history where there's no such thing as natural immunity. They were 0 for 8. And yet they're going to define with some disinformation governance board what we can say, what we can tweet, what we can read, what we can post. You got to be kidding me. As RFK Jr. testified before our committee, never forgot what he said. He said, when you look at history, it is never the good guys who are for censorship. It is always the bad guys, and that's our concern. We need debate. The best way to answer bad speech, wrong speech, stupid speech, crazy speech, even hate speech is more speech. We need the First Amendment. Our committee will continue to move legislation that protects free speech from threats, including threats from abroad. And with that, I now recognize our ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our witnesses. I imagine that in a hearing about threats to freedom of speech abroad, we might hear from a Russian dissident about Putin's massive violations of political freedom, or the death of Alexei Navalny in prison, or perhaps a Chinese pro-democracy activist about President Xi's attacks on free speech in Hong Kong, Tibet, Xinjiang, or the persecution trial of Jimmy Lai, or maybe a journalist about the Saudi Crown Prince's assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post writer who demanded freedom from religious persecution and oppression in Saudi Arabia. But no, the dictators of the world have got nothing to fear from this hearing. The Republicans called it to attack our democratic allies in Europe. The star witness is not a human rights leader like Navalny, but a far-right, pro-Putin politician who leads the UK Reform Party, a party that has 4 members out of 650 members in the parliament. He calls England an authoritarian regime, while saying that Vladimir Putin is the world leader he admires the most. Well, this hearing mimics Vice President J.D. Vance, who went to the Munich Security Conference in February. In the first 2 minutes of his speech, whitewashed the world's leading autocratic regimes, proclaiming that the threat that worries him is not Russia. It's not China, he said, but rather it's our European allies. Amazing. Republicans are promoting far-right parties in Europe, like Alternative for Deutschland, Reform UK, and Rassemblement National Français, and ignoring massive repression in Russia, China, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and among all the autocrats of the world. Republicans are vilifying European liberal democracies simply for engaging in the kind of line-drawing exercises that we Americans engage in under our First Amendment with respect to the epidemic of child pornography, protecting children from other harmful content, defamatory speech, online scams and false advertising, and speech inciting riots and imminent lawless action. All forms of speech that the First Amendment does not protect and whose tricky contours must still be drawn by law. We could have a meaningful hearing on this complicated subject, but this hearing is just a drive-by hit against a strong Democratic ally to benefit a Donald Trump sycophant and wannabe. But it's even worse than this. Not only are our colleagues ignoring intensifying repression in the world's dictatorships, they're also trying to distract the world from the attack on freedom taking place right here in America every single day. Americans aren't worried about the EU or the Online Safety Act in the UK. We're not worried about white nationalists not having enough license to incite lynch mobs to set immigrants on fire in their bedrooms. Americans are worried that Donald Trump is working to rewrite and whitewash American history in our museums, our textbooks, and our national parks, to destroy PBS, NPR, and public broadcasting, to ban books in our libraries, and to censor any news stories critical of him by installing political henchmen in private broadcast rooms. Americans know that academic freedom is in danger when the administration cancels and withholds billions of dollars in scientific and medical research funding from American universities, even for urgent life-saving studies about breast cancer or heart attacks, as a way to force schools to impose government orthodoxy on curriculum, hiring, admissions, and any student and faculty speech that MAGA considers politically incorrect. Americans see Trump trying to harass, intimidate, control, and shut down the press, like ABC, CBS, NBC, NPR, and PBS. The Republican-controlled FCC essentially blackmailed media companies Skydance and Paramount into agreeing to install a spy, a monitor, a minder, I think the Brits might say, to police CBS news programs to make sure that they are being sufficiently Trumpy in giving us the news in order to get approval of a merger from FCC. Meanwhile, Trump sued 60 Minutes and CBS personally for $20 billion for the frivolous cause of action that he thought an interview with Kamala Harris was edited too favorably, and then walked away with a cool $16 million in a shakedown settlement for his library, all part of a now familiar pattern. When Trump doesn't like the news, he sues the broadcaster and unleashes the FCC on them until they pay up and agree to a government spy stationed in their office. Free speech is so much in danger in the US today that if the government tries to violate our rights, we might not even be able to find a lawyer to defend ourselves because Trump is systematically exacting retribution against law firms that represent anyone on the other side of a case against him. Look, our country loves free speech. We fight for free speech. We fought for free speech, and we know it's in danger when students who are lawfully in the United States are taken off the street and arrested without warrants by masked federal agents in unmarked cars for writing an article or attending a rally that Stephen Miller doesn't like. Free speech is in danger when visitors to our country have their social media accounts screened at the border for any criticism of Donald Trump. Free speech is in danger when To Kill a Mockingbird, The Handmaid's Tale, 1984, and The Kite Runner are banned from our schools and libraries across the country, and even families defending our freedom abroad have to fight for their kids' right to read freely in public schools run by the Department of Defense. Freedom's in danger when the administration tramples the civil service rights of hundreds of thousands of nonpartisan expert civil servants. These civil servants have been protected against political discrimination for more than a century to maintain the excellence and independence of our federal workforce, but they're now being fired simply for doing their jobs, like prosecuting violent criminals and insurrectionists who try to overthrow our government and attack our police officers, or because they honestly gave honest economic information and labor statistics to the public. These honorable civil servants are being fired because they won't be the political hacks Trump demands that they be. When private comments made by federal employees are scrutinized for anti-Trump bias and they can lose their jobs because of it, then we've entered the realm not just of Vladimir Putin, but of Joseph Stalin. Now, Mr. Trump and Mr. Farage both claim they're protectors of free speech, but they only want to protect speech they agree with. In the UK, Mr. Farage is openly promoting the abolition of the Human Rights Act of 1998 to be replaced with a British Bill of Rights that limits the right of free speech to British citizens and legally sanctioned residents. He complains that racist threats against immigrants are not protected free speech, while he proposes to strip migrants, tourists, and perhaps even visiting American congresspeople of any free speech rights at all. I had my own close encounter with that when Mr. Farage and his team presented for more than an hour in a conversation we had about free speech. And after 3 minutes of talking, he cut me off and terminated the meeting because he didn't like what I was saying. That's the kind of free speech he's committed to. There is a free speech crisis in America today, but there's no free speech crisis in Britain. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has not shut down GB News, where Mr. Farage has his own show, just because Mr. Farage has used his airtime to call for banning peaceful protests that he disagrees with. No one has stopped him from going on Russian TV 17 times and saying also and repeating that the one world political leader he most admired was Vladimir Putin, even though Vladimir Putin is a war criminal and a dictator who has regularly interfered in other countries' democratic elections. No one has stopped Mr. Farage from parroting Putin's absurd talking points, like when Farage claimed that NATO, the US and Britain, provoked this war in Ukraine. For a man who fashions himself as some kind of a free speech martyr, Mr. Farage seems most at home with the autocrats and dictators of the world who are crushing freedom on earth. Mr. Farage wants to get rid of the Online Safety Act in his country, a law shepherded by the Conservative Party and implemented by the Labor Party, which bans child pornography online, protects children from harmful content, forbids non-consensual pornography and other unlawful content. He should go and advance the positions he's taking here in Congress today in Parliament, which is meeting today, if he's serious about it. To the people of UK who think this Putin-loving free speech imposter and Trump sycophant will protect freedom in your country, come on over to America and see what Trump and MAGA are doing to destroy our freedom, kidnap college students off the street, ban books from our libraries, militarize our police and unleash them against our communities, take over our universities, wreck our professional civil service, and turn the government into a money-making machine for Trump and his family. You might think twice before you let Mr. Farage make Britain great again. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I would just point out that the encounter that the ranking member had with Mr. Farage was a little different at my recollection than how it was described. And I would also point out that the gentleman alleges there's no free speech in America under President Trump, while his staff member is holding up countless number of articles criticizing the Trump administration. I think that's a little bit of a, well, let's say that's not how I think it actually goes. So we now will introduce today's witnesses. We will start with the Right Honourable Nigel Farage. Mr. Farage is a member of Parliament from Clacton and the leader of the Reform UK Party. He is also a television host and was a leading proponent of the Brexit campaign. Mr. Lurin Price is an attorney with ADF International, a nonprofit organization that works to protect religious freedom, free speech, parental rights, and the sanctity of life. Before joining ADF International, he was an attorney in Ireland. Mr. Morgan Reid is the president of the App Association, a trade association comprised of app developers and connected device manufacturers. He routinely testifies before Congress on matters of interest to his members, including artificial intelligence, competition, and other issues. And we have Professor David Kaye. Mr. Kaye is a clinical professor of law at the UC Irvine School of Law. Professor Kaye previously served as the United States Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of the right to freedom of opinion and expression. We welcome our witnesses and thank them for appearing today. We will begin by swearing you in. Would you all please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record show that each of the witnesses answered in the affirmative. You can, thank you, please be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. I think we'll just go down the line, and we will start with Mr. Reid, then Mr. Price, Mr. Farage, and then Professor Kaye. So, Mr. Reid, you're recognized. 5 minutes.
My name is Morgan Reid, and I'm the president of ACT, the App Association. Our members are small and medium-sized tech companies from your districts and around the world. We build and sell the apps and the products you love. If you're scheduling a haircut, tracking your productivity at work, or using online tools to train your employees, it's likely one of my members made that happen. I'm here to tell you that our European members are just as good, just as smart, and just as entrepreneurial as our American members. Whether it's Clement Sauvage in France, Mitchell Volkring in the Netherlands, or Mark Thomas in the UK, their companies are busy trying to change the world. The difference between them and our American members can be seen in the ever-growing wall of ex-ante regulation and compliance requirements from an EU government that is constantly asking how government can be more involved rather than less. Unfortunately, the DMA is a perfect encapsulation of the problem. Ostensibly, it exists to make it easier for EU companies to compete with the US tech lead. Instead, it just creates leadership in red tape. Small companies find value in the bigger platforms for 3 boring and absolutely vital reasons. They need to offload overhead, have access to a global market, and have customer trust. Because small businesses are always overworked and undermanned. For us, offloading overhead is critical. A small business is trying to ship a product, not learn about tax laws in 160 countries. We don't want to sign multiple contracts with middlemen to handle shipping or web storage, or send bills to dozens of different platforms, each with their own PO system. Small businesses need to focus their time on serving the customer to compete. And of course, to grow your small business, you need customers. And that means access to a global market. If your product has fewer than 100 customers in your state, that's a hobby. But 100,000 customers worldwide, that's a business. Nearly every one of the DMA's designated gatekeepers are actually gateways to a global market. But you might say, Morgan, the internet itself is a global market. And we would agree, but the internet lacks one key characteristic: trust. Today, many of us take for granted the measures of keeping malware and other harmful content off of our devices and off of our shopping sites. But DMA threatens to change this by forcing companies to roll out the red carpet for bad actors. As a result, consumers will rationally steer away from startups and small developers they've never heard of and towards larger, more established rivals that spend millions on marketing and buy Super Bowl ads to build their brand. Don't forget who's pushing the DMA. It's companies like Spotify, Yelp, DuckDuckGo, companies you've heard of. And just in case you think I'm exaggerating, the first business to take advantage of the DMA's requirements wasn't some brilliant startup being kept down by big tech. It was an app called Hot Tub, a porn aggregator that can now be sideloaded and could even operate without parental controls. This is the most damaging aspect of the DMA. By forcing the gatekeepers to remove features or capabilities that would keep bad actors off your smartphone and out of your wallet, the DMA demands the world adopt a flea market model, where anybody with a plastic folding table and some boxes that fell off the back of the truck are given the same access to consumers as legitimate businesses. For small businesses, we want the platforms to provide us with ever-improving tools, features, and pricing models to make it attractive. We don't love the big platforms, we do business with them. Because without our products, their platforms aren't worth very much. Without their tools, our overhead goes up, our speed goes down, and trust goes out the window. If we have any ask of the platforms, it's for them to do more, not less. We want them to do more to reduce overhead, more to protect our intellectual property, and do more to maintain those trust relationships. And into this relatively straightforward business arrangement, Europe has injected regulatory walls like the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act, the Online Safety Act, our old friend GDPR, and the newest edition, the AI Act. These laws aren't there to lower friction. They are, as Teresa Ribera at the European Commission puts it, focused on creating a culture of compliance. That's a quote. While an ever-thickening wall of overlapping regulations is exactly what compliance lawyers want, it's not what innovators want. It's not what small businesses want, and it's not what customers want. We ask you to reject the European regulatory culture and instead focus on a culture of opportunity and innovation. Small businesses never succeed if we can't beat the red tape. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Reid. Mr. Price, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Raskin, distinguished members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lurin Price. I am a barrister and legal counsel for ADF International, and I'm very happy to come here today to speak to you about the perilous situation for freedom of expression in Europe and why it matters for Americans. I do this on the basis of my experience litigating in speech and religious liberty cases before the European Court of Human Rights. However, today, principally, I wish to address the Digital Services Act of the European Union. But before I do that, I'd like to set the scene briefly by telling you how bad things have become in Europe and the United Kingdom, and very much building on the remarks of the chairman. Because when I met some of the members of the committee in Europe recently, I think that there was a genuine element of surprise and disbelief about the state of affairs in Europe. I'll give you some examples. In Finland, our client, Päivi Räsänen, a member of parliament, is now in year 5 of a prosecution for simply posting a verse from scripture on Twitter. Our client, Rose Doherty in Scotland, a 74-year-old grandmother, was arrested by offering to have consensual conversations for people. Adam Smith-Connor, an army veteran, was prosecuted for praying silently in his head in England. And just yesterday, you'll have seen that the UK police arrested a comedian and fellow Irishman, Graham Linehan, a person I know well, for tweets about gender ideology. German pensioners are having their homes raided and are being prosecuted for insulting politicians. Indeed, one member of the Green Party in Germany has over 700 criminal complaints outstanding for insult. What's happening in Europe is, as Vice President Vance said on St. Valentine's Day in Munich, a serious retreat from a fundamental value, that of free speech. It's a sign that our European political elite has lost control of the narrative, and the Digital Services Act is the response to that, an increasingly desperate attempt to suppress growing public discontent. Why should this matter for Americans? Why should you be concerned? Because of the worldwide reach of European law, the so-called Brussels effect changes regulation in every area that the European Union chooses to regulate. And now they've entered the business of regulating speech. And they're very proud of the so-called Brussels effect when you ask them about it. This new EU law is essentially an anti-speech law. And when you read the case law of the European Court of Justice, statements from senior officials, and the provisions of the Digital Services Act, you can see everything is there to create a digital censorship industrial complex. We see a whole structure of trusted flaggers, codes of conduct on so-called hate speech and misinformation, content moderation for so-called systemic risks. Much of this is hidden in bland technocratic language in the DSA, and our written submissions go into some of the problems associated with it. But it constitutes nothing more than an attempt to bring Brussels regulation of speech onto a global stage. Furthermore, when the European Union is now negotiating trade deals, including with your neighbours to the north in Canada, they insist that the Digital Services Act is part of that. So it's very clearly a global intent. It means that the European Union will set the global standard when it comes to speech. And because of the laws that I just outlined in Europe, the type of prosecutions we're seeing, it's an extremely low standard. It draws, I would suggest to you, a digital curtain where once there was an iron curtain. And US companies bear the brunt disproportionately of this. They're hijacked by the DSA to become essentially the EU's global censorship police, whether they like it or not. The DSA contains expansive powers of investigation, huge compliance costs, and crippling fines if they're found to be non-compliant for removing so-called illegal content. Indeed, I commend your committee's report recently on showing the bias at the heart of the system. As we speak, companies are having to make a decision, an invidious decision between whether or not they defend German pensioners criticising politicians or they comply with the European Commission and with national laws. We know from COVID censorship which is the most likely route they take. Compliance is easier and cheaper, but it is not good for speech. Indeed, yesterday I was just informed by a senior lawyer for a major US company that the Germans are prosecuting a 14-year-old boy for a mild online post. They want the identity of another post outside Germany, and they've launched criminal proceedings against US employees of this company for refusing to pass over the identity information. That's the attitude we're dealing with. We've seen it from Thierry Breton, from others in the European Commission. They want this censorship power and they want it globally. The digital square is one of the great gifts from the United States to the world. It has been transformative for our political discussion. But the EU wants to make itself the sheriff of the square, and it's armed itself with powerful tools. And there are more to come, unfortunately, including the Democracy Shield. I agree with Ranking Member Raskin that it is sad when close allies and democracies do this kind of thing, and we must call them out for it. We must take a stand against this new censorship wave. Democracy requires free speech. I'm looking forward to our discussion and any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Price. The Right Honourable Member of Parliament, Mr. Farage, is recognized.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Chairman Jordan, for inviting me here today. And it turns out, with news in the last 48 hours, to have been really rather timely. I'm delighted to reacquaint with the charming Mr. Raskin. That was delightful testimony you gave me earlier on with your speech. But hey, that's fine. You can say what you like. I don't care, because that's what free speech is. And in a sense, this has all been going wrong now for a couple of decades. We've kind of forgotten the Voltairean principles that we'll fight and defend to the death your right to say something that we fundamentally disagree with. That is the absolute foundation, if you think about it, of free speech, of democracy, of living in freedom. It's kind of why we fought 2 world wars at massive, massive cost to defend that very principle for ourselves and for many, many others around the country. And I first became worried about all this with cancel culture. You know, the idea that we can't have this speaker go to a university because some people might be offended by what he or she have to say. It is important to note that there is not a parent in the United Kingdom, and I would guess it's the same for America too, that is not concerned about content their children as minors can find on the internet. Not a single parent that is not concerned about this. But at the moment, we're not finding the right solutions. I do myself begin to think that hardware might be one of the solutions. That laptops, that handsets could be programmed so that many, many apps and many, many services simply aren't available from these devices. But what we've done is to go down the legislative route. And it's extraordinary that, you know, I come from the land of Magna Carta. I come from the land that gave us the mother of parliaments, and it doesn't give me any great joy to be sitting in America and describing the really awful authoritarian situation that we have now sunk into. J.D. Vance did us all a service at the Munich Security Conference back in February this year. He really got this debate up and running, and it's a vital one. We've run on since then. The Online Safety Act was put in place by the last Conservative government. I don't doubt for a minute they're good intentions, but sometimes the road to hell is paved with those good intentions. And we are now where we are. We have a couple of very famous cases. We, of course, have Lucy Connolly, who put out an intemperate tweet after the savage murder of those 3 beautiful young girls, she herself, a mother who had lost a child. It was intemperate, it was wrong, but she removed it 3.5 hours later, sentenced to 31 months in prison. She's now out, having served 40% of the time. I wanted to bring her with me today as living proof of what can go wrong. Sadly, the restrictions that have been put on her banned her from making the trip, which is a very, very great shame. And we, of course, have the extraordinary events that we understood yesterday of Graham Linehan, the comedic writer, and he put out some tweets months ago when he was in Arizona, and months later he arrives at Heathrow Airport to be met by 5 armed police. Armed police, not a big deal in the USA, a very big deal in the United Kingdom. 5 of them. And he was arrested and taken away for questioning. He's not even a British citizen. He's an Irish citizen. This could happen to any American man or woman that goes to Heathrow that has said things online that the British government and British police don't like. It is a potentially big threat to tech bosses, to many, many others. This legislation we've got will damage trade between our countries, threaten free speech across the West because of the knock-on rollout effects of this legislation from us or from the European Union. So I've come today as well to be a klaxon, to say to you, don't allow, piece by piece, this to happen here in America. And you would be doing us and yourselves and all freedom-loving people a favor if your politicians and your businesses said to the British government, you've simply got this wrong. At what point did we become North Korea? Well, I think the Irish comedy writer found that out 2 days ago at Heathrow Airport. This is a genuinely worrying, concerning, and shocking situation, and I thank you for the opportunity to come here today.
Thank you, Mr. Well said. Thank you, Mr. Farage. Professor Kaye, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Raskin, members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to appear before you. I ask that my written statement be entered into the record. My name is David Kaye. I'm a law professor at the University of California, Irvine, where I research and teach in international law. I know something about censorship. From 2014 to 2020, I was the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Opinion and Expression. In that role, I monitored a growing global assault on free speech. Among other things, I led a landmark effort to call out China's attacks on civil society. I detailed repression of media and criticism in Putin's Russia. I condemned Iran's suppression of dissent. And I even criticized democratic governments when they sought to force platforms to take down lawful speech. That is censorship. Violations of the human right to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, guaranteed by Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, a treaty ratified by the United States in 1992. Inspired by the First Amendment, it guarantees a speaker's rights and the rights of everyone to access information. So it pains me that the United States, the country that had my back as Special Rapporteur, the land of the First Amendment's make no law, now leads the charge to undermine freedom of speech and of the press. The threat is real, live, and I think shocking given our nation's historic commitments. The administration follows a well-worn path. A few examples. The silencing of scientists and public health officials. Just last week, the head of the CDC was fired because she would not agree to change her conclusions about vaccines. The administration has scrubbed websites that doctors and parents use to make decisions. Censoring and punishing speech of visitors. In visa interviews and at the border, there are increasing reports of officers screening visitors according to their social media activity or detaining and deporting based on speech and op-eds. And the repeated assaults on the media, as we've seen attacks on public broadcasting, frivolous lawsuits against media outlets, and the decimation of Voice of America. This is the tip of an iceberg of censorship that should concern this committee and every American. Yet US officials who claim to be free speech warriors are spending their time looking abroad. Now, I know of nobody who argues that EU and British laws on speech are perfect. Still, The EU Digital Services Act and the UK Online Safety Act respond to problems both sides of the aisle in Congress have found serious but have yet to address: the enormous, opaque, and unaccountable power of a small number of massive tech companies over our information environments. The EU answered the question of massive platform power not by claiming new powers to take down content or accounts. It adopted new rules to empower users, including by requiring notice and an opportunity to appeal content moderation decisions. The Online Safety Act, championed by Labor and conservative parties, was widely popular as an attempt to hold big tech accountable. It does have elements that concern me, yet whatever faults it might have, it, like any other British law, is subject to legal challenge and review by courts for any violation of fundamental rights, just as we would expect of any democracy. Neither established censorship regimes. I encourage members of this committee to consider two things. First, instead of criticizing allied democracies, consider the kinds of content online that you find objectionable. Maybe it's anti-Semitic or Islamophobic content, misogyny, child endangerment, content glorifying terrorism or inciting violence. How do you propose to address those in a way that is consistent with free speech values? That's not an easy question, and it can't be waved away with just 3 words: because free speech. The EU and the UK have made their choices, subject to democratic judicial oversight, and acting in good faith. I think this committee could do the same. Second, this committee has the obligation to protect Americans' freedom of expression here at home. The administration is putting freedom of expression under direct attack, and I think oversight and constraint from this committee would make quite a bit of sense. That, I would respectfully submit, is the real threat to American speech and innovation, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. The chair, we'll now proceed under the 5-minute rule. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan. Well, one of the things we found out on our trip through Europe was that the U.S. innovates, China duplicates, and now the EU regulates. Mr. Reid, I have a question for you first. Reports estimate that complying with the EU's Digital Markets Act, the DMA, could cost American companies up to $1 billion every single year. That's not just a number on a page. Those costs ultimately fall on American workers, who will see fewer jobs, on consumers, who will face higher prices and fewer choices, and on entrepreneurs, who will have a harder time competing against subsidized foreign rivals. Mr. Reid, is it correct that these compliance costs affect our economy? And what does it mean for America if Europe is allowed to impose these kind of costs on U.S. innovation?
The short answer is yes, absolutely. The more detailed answer is that, unfortunately, that Europe has taken an ex-ante approach to regulation. The United States has always done well with an ex-post. As a small business entrepreneur, I actually want fraud to be gone after. I want deceptive practices to be reduced. But unfortunately, what we see in the EU is an ex-ante process that ups my compliance requirements without actually giving customers the certainty of the result. So it's absolutely raising costs, and for American developers, we see one of the largest problems is how do you get to those European customers if the first tranche you hit is paying a compliance lawyer to meet all of these tests?
Thank you. Mr. Price, our Federal Trade Commission Chairman Ferguson has warned that government regulation can stifle, obviously, competition and innovation, and in many cases, the government itself becomes the most dangerous of all the monopolies. Isn't it the DMA, is the DMA a perfect example of that? It kind of weaponizes and makes it burdensome with regulations. Can you give me your comments on the DMA and what do you think the status is right now?
I certainly agree that European regulation generally slows down competition. It creates a situation whereby companies are unable to innovate with any degree of speed because they're constantly looking over their shoulder towards regulators around compliance. DMA, a very good example of that. Not just the DMA, though. Of course, you have the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. You have the DSA, the Digital Services Act, and constantly more and more being added. It's been estimated in the digital market space alone since 2016. 30 pages of regulation existed at the time. We're now over 1,000 and growing. So the European Union's response to American innovation is more and more regulation, generally around nebulous concepts like safetyism and protecting consumers, but very often just, particularly with the DSA, to create, unfortunately, a censorship industrial complex, as I outlined. DMA, very good example of that as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reid, if I could come back to you, President Trump just secured a landmark commitment from the EU to address unjustified digital trade barriers. It was part of the US-EU trade deal. I'm hopeful that this will result in the EU kind of removing, and a lot of people we talked to in Europe when we were there said that there was a possibility that they could pull back on some of this. What action could President Trump take to hold the EU accountable to their commitment? And are there additional enforcement tools that Congress could provide to make that happen?
Well, I think, Congressman Fitzgerald, you've done great work in reaching out and sending letters to make it clear what the position of the United States government is on these issues. The reality is that the Europeans themselves, through the Draghi report, are recognizing that they have done a lot to harm those very same industries. We're hopeful that the United States can continue to use the careful power and the careful discussions through our trade negotiations and other actions to get them to step back. But we're here to talk about free speech, and so one of the things I would point out is we want the small businesses in Europe to also be able to speak and say, hey, we need these regulations pulled back.
So just to follow up to that then as well, a 2024 staff report by the Housing Oversight Committee found that FTC Chair Lina Khan was using taxpayer dollars to send agency quote-unquote liaisons to the EU to assist with the implementation of the Digital Markets Act. Mr. Reid, do you think it's appropriate for that type of consultation or for the use of taxpayer dollars to help a foreign country implement laws that unfairly discriminate against U.S. companies?
Well, we don't think taxpayer dollars should ever be used to unfairly discriminate against United States companies. We're hopeful that U.S. taxpayer dollars can be used to ensure open markets around the world and a safe environment for our entrepreneurs to succeed.
Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the subcommittee, or ranking member of the subcommittee, gentleman who made a big announcement this week. We're sorry to hear about, but we appreciate your service, and you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, there is a clear and present danger to free speech in America, but it is not across the Atlantic Ocean. It is right here in Washington, sitting in the Oval Office. At a time when the greatest threat to the First Amendment rights of Americans resides in the White House, our Republican colleagues have brought us here today to talk about Europe. They've invited a fringe politician from the United Kingdom to attack the laws regulating certain conduct online in his country and the European Union, laws that are intended to combat disinformation by hostile foreign actors, hate speech, and other fraudulent or criminal conduct. They have sounded the alarms about these foreign laws, but when it comes to the Trump administration's suppression of speech in this country, Republicans are curiously and dangerously silent. There is virtually no corner of society that Donald Trump and his administration have left untouched by their effort to impose their radical views on the American people and to stamp out dissent. Since taking office, President Trump and members of his administration have used the powers of the executive branch in an attempt to silence their political opponents by attacking our core democratic institutions, such as academia, the legal profession, and journalism. These are moves straight out of the authoritarian playbook. For example, the Trump administration has taken aim at colleges and universities, trying to bend them to its will by withholding billions of dollars in scientific research funding, a short-sighted move that will set back innovation in this country by decades. And in some cases, including at my alma mater of Columbia, it has demanded onerous conditions that infringe on academic freedom. On these same college campuses, students are being kidnapped for writing op-eds, and others are being deported for participating in protests. The Trump administration has also targeted disfavored law firms that dare to challenge the president or to hold him accountable, or simply for hiring an attorney who clashed with Trump in the past. Some have sadly capitulated to its campaign of extortion. The president has even taken aim at the arts and humanities, launching a hostile takeover of the Kennedy Center and censoring exhibits at the Smithsonian Institution, attempting to whitewash American history and to stamp out free expression. He is also engaged in a dangerous campaign of harassment and intimidation of the media. For example, last October, he sued CBS for $10 billion for editing a 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris in a way he didn't like. Although the suit was widely ridiculed by First Amendment attorneys who called it meritless and absurd, Paramount, the parent company of CBS News, was desperate to win approval from the Trump-controlled FCC for its proposed multi-billion-dollar merger and felt pressure to settle this baseless lawsuit. Ultimately, it paid $16 million to settle the suit, and just days later, the FCC approved the merger. What a coincidence. This followed ABC's settlement of a similarly baseless Trump lawsuit for $15 million because of corporate pressure. And now the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch face their own $10 billion lawsuit from Donald Trump over the Journal's reporting that shed new light on Trump's well-documented relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. I'm not aware of any president in the past suing media companies or newspapers or television stations for free expression they didn't like. Professor Kaye, the free press is essential to our democracy and the rule of law. Can you explain how President Trump's attacks on the news media and his attempts to sue them into silence impact freedom of expression and freedom of speech in this country?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Nadler, and congratulations on your announcement this week. Well, I think it's important to note that when we're talking about attacks on the press, it's not just about attacks on the journalists themselves or the media outlets themselves. It's about every American's right of access to information. It's about the freedom of public debate that we get from a media that isn't intimidated either by suit or by criticism from the Oval Office or whatever it might be. And so I think it's really important to think about these kinds of attacks, not only as those on journalists, but on the entire information ecosystem. And I think it's also important for us to realize that we can't pick and choose what censorship we like and don't like. I think the chairman's statement was really correct when he said censorship used by people in power to censor critics, that's at the core. And we should be examining where do we see that. We tend to see that quite a bit in this country, I think in an unprecedented way.
In your testimony, you identified a number of threats to freedom of expression in the United States, including science and public health. It's also been reported that the government has a list of hundreds of words, ranging from issues related to climate change to diversity, equity, and inclusion, that it essentially is banned from government websites and users to make funding decisions. Is this true?
I've seen those reports, and I understand that to be true as well, particularly the use of lists of words, essentially to censor research that would be conducted by scientists at universities and at national academies in the United States.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ranking member is recognized for unanimous consent. Understand?
Yes.
Gentleman's
Mr. Chairman, this is a minority fact sheet about the majority's report on the Digital Services Act.
Well, we'll look forward to reading that. Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, I have another.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for unanimous consent.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an article published by Reuters on October 29th, 2024, titled Fact Check, UK Woman Jailed for Inciting Racial Hatred, Not Posting Hurtful Words, which confirms that Lucy Connolly pled guilty to inciting racial hatred and was not, as claimed in deceptive social media posts, punished merely for posting, quote, edgy words on the internet.
Without objection. I'm sure we'll
Thank
be
you, Mr.
some
Chairman.
comments about that later. And the gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor Kaye, being a fellow Californian, I'm sure you're aware and could correct the ranking member that our own governor has sued Fox for $787 million. Isn't that correct?
I'm not familiar with that.
Well, I didn't think you would be, but neither was the ranking member, apparently. MP Farage, do you have the equivalent of what the Professor Kaye was talking about, which is the Article 19? You're a signatory to that international convention, if you will, on free speech. Do you feel that it is being observed in the UK?
may be a signatory to it, and we may, and the Prime Minister, you know, today in the House of Commons was talking about free speech, and indeed when President Trump was with him in Scotland the other day, he talked about our proud history of free speech, but what people say and what they do are two very different things. And the argument is that the Online Safety Act, I'll repeat what I said earlier, may have been designed by the Tories with the best of intentions, but has turned out to be the sledgehammer that misses the nut. It's not protecting kids, and it is damaging.
So now, going back to the United States, you don't have a constitutional framework that is the equivalent of ours in that you have no First Amendment absolute guarantee. Is that correct?
It is correct. You know, I mean, our Constitution isn't in written form. It's based on common law that's evolved and adapted over centuries, and your founding fathers looked at the best bits that we had.
So it appears in Europe and in the UK, free speech is whatever the bloody members think it is at a given time, and it changes with the will of the people they elect. Is that right?
Yes, but I don't think at any point we've really had a proper debate about infringement of free speech until COVID. And I think COVID changed the game.
Okay.
I think the government, social media platforms, big media, suddenly there were arguments that needed to be made that were banned.
So, Mr. Reid, to your knowledge, and I would go to the professor, but he seems to be ill-informed even on our own governor's lawsuits. First Amendment. In the United States, you can sue for anything. Do you often win if you sue against institutions like Fox, Wall Street Journal? Isn't it true that effectively the First Amendment creates a tremendous shield against anything except malicious, deliberate lies?
Not my area of expertise. We can absolutely talk about apps, but as an American, yes, that is absolutely my understanding.
And you have no such protection, just the opposite. You have no idea in Europe or in Britain about what is going to be allowed or not allowed. In other words, you don't know where to call balls and strikes. You just simply have to pay the fines when you get to them.
Well, I only carry one passport, so I'm more aware of the American laws, but that is my understanding correct.
Okay, now, we do have a First Amendment, and we are a signatory to Article 19. So I'm going to go a little bit into opinion. Now, I'm the author of No Censorship on Our Shores, meaning, Mr. Price, I know you're familiar with it, I'm not going to tolerate censorship overseas and then have those people come to the United States. Now, Professor K may object to the idea that I'm not going to let people who have been involved in censorship come into the United States because I think it's unacceptable to get away with that overseas. But let's be reciprocal for a moment for Mr. Reid and for everyone. If we're seeing Europe and the UK and other countries stifle what we are guaranteed in the U.S., and particularly arrest somebody for what they said while on U.S. soils, shouldn't this administration be just as strong and reciprocal that we will not tolerate that activity even off our shores? And isn't that ultimately what the United States must make available to the world, essentially guarantee the First Amendment to anyone, anywhere, if they want to do business with the United States? Mr. Price.
The leadership of the United States on this issue has been transformative for the discussion in Europe. And from the President, Secretary Rubio, and the Vice President, they have transformed the issue, and I hope more comes.
So, to the fringe parliamentarian, as you were called, and probably the future Prime Minister, what say you?
Yes, for Mr. Nadler's benefit, it's a very big fringe, and we're doing rather well, but there we are. Look, you know, if you were to follow, Mr. Eisler, the logic of your argument that you were to ban people from entering America who would pass legislation that was prejudicial against American companies or American citizens and would threaten them with potential arrest if they came across the other side of the pond, I think the practical difficulty with that is you'd have to ban the British government, the entire Labour Party. So I'm not sure in practical terms that it works, but I understand the sentiment.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me be clear. I am not here to defend the European laws And I've often criticized the approach of European countries to internet-related issues. It's really generally wrong-headed. But I don't really think that's the point of this hearing. I think the real threat to the First Amendment isn't coming from Europe. It's coming from Republican-led states that have introduced bills to close the open internet, and most of all, from Donald Trump, who's actively trampling free speech here at home. I think it's rather absurd for this committee to spend our time criticizing laws we have no jurisdiction over while ignoring the countless ways the Trump administration is tearing up the First Amendment. If this committee is really serious about protecting free speech, we need to focus on the Trump administration's literal assault on the First Amendment that's happening right here at home. So, Professor Kaye, I have a series of questions for you. Do you think that arresting international students for being critical of U.S. foreign policy is an attack on the First Amendment?
Yes, absolutely.
And isn't that because it's not just the right of the person to speak, but the right of all the rest of us to hear? The First Amendment isn't just about the speaker, it's also about the listener. Isn't that correct?
Right, that's true.
Now, a federal judge agreed with you and with us, warning that arresting students for their views chills the speech of millions of Americans. The government can't punish speech simply because they don't like its content. This year, as has been mentioned by others, President Trump's FCC blocked the CBS merger until the network agreed to change its programming and install a so-called bias monitor. The head of 60 Minutes resigned, saying he could no longer make independent decisions about the news. Doesn't that sound like a violation of the First Amendment's guarantee of a free press?
It does, and I think it's important to underline that restrictions on free speech don't come just from a law or the police outside your door. It can come from a whole network of intimidation, of public attack that really does chill speech, including the kinds of attacks that lead to deportations of people who are here just to study.
Since January, the Trump administration has revoked over 6,000 student visas because the speech of these students didn't align with what Trump agreed with. And now they're doing the same to immigrants who are applying for citizenship. Does that raise First Amendment concerns, do you think?
I think it raises First Amendment concerns, but it's also in a broader way, it's raising concerns about our tolerance of dissent, of this government's tolerance of criticism. And not everything is specifically about the First Amendment and the ability to enforce it in our courts. Sometimes it's about leaders in our country actually promoting a culture of open debate and open access to information. The very things that we've heard a lot about already this morning, a kind of marketplace of ideas that some people still talk about, that's not just about what the law provides, that's also about how our leaders behave towards that kind of open debate.
The Federal Trade Commission held up a merger of two major advertising firms, Omnicom and Interpublic, until they agreed to run ads on X, essentially a government-ordered gift to Elon Musk. Isn't that a blatant violation of free speech standards, forcing private companies to promote speech they otherwise wouldn't?
It's certainly a kind of extensive use of the term of jawboning that has come up over the last several years. And it's a kind of pressure that absolutely interferes with free speech. And it's also the kind of weaponizing of our federal agencies in support of a particular actor, a particular business person.
It seems to me that these actions affect not just the companies or the individuals that are the target of this abuse, but they're also to scare off everyone else from engaging in that behavior. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what we're seeing right now with just this essentially a kind of avalanche of restrictions and intimidations of free speech in this country, that it's designed to chill that kind of debate. It's designed to chill whistleblowers, to chill scientists, to chill professors and students. I think that's essentially what we're witnessing right now.
My time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Generally yields back.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent.
You see request from the gentleman, California.
Yes, I ask unanimous consent that the Politico ad or news that was dated June 27, 2025, saying Gavin Newsom sues for $787 million be placed in the record.
Without objection. Mr. Price, has anything in the Digital Services Act changed in the last year?
No, sir.
Hasn't been amended, hasn't been changed at all?
No, sir.
So everything Mr. Breton wrote 1 year ago today, well, August 12, 2024, that's still in place, where he said to an American running an American company about an interview that was yet to happen, future happen interview, threatened this individual. None of that nothing in the law has changed that would change what actions this individual took.
Nothing in the law.
Just because Mr. Breton's gone doesn't mean Ms. Verkunen can't do the same darn thing, right?
Precisely.
Yeah, and that's the concern. Mr. Price, is this statement, we need to take back our country, is that statement hate speech?
We don't really know what hate speech is. It's so vague, and that's the problem with it. I wouldn't regard that as hate speech.
Well, you may not, but the EU regulators do, because they had a workshop on May 25th where, this is part of our investigation, material we'd subpoenaed, they gave us this information. They said it is hate speech. That's a concern, right?
Yes, sir.
And it could be made by an American and be termed hate speech, and there could be some ramifications for Americans' First Amendment liberties. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Price, what's a trusted flagger?
A trusted flagger is an NGO or a private organization that's recognized under the DSA, and if they identify or a complaint has been made...
Wait. Recognized by who?
Oh, the terms of the DSA. Oh, and the national regulators and the commission as well.
Okay, and they do what? So they're recognized by the government. They're approved by the government.
Yes,
all right? And what do?
If they identify content that they regard as illegal content, the companies have to give priority to removing that content.
Oh, so people that the government approves tell companies what they can allow on their platform and what they can't, right?
That's correct, sir.
And the same people who approved these folks are the same people who conducted the workshop and said, we need to take back our country as hate speech. Is that fair to say?
That's correct, sir.
Yeah, and that's the concern. And what happens if these trusted flaggers approved by the government, the same government that says we need to take back our country as hate speech? By the way, I think that statement is made probably more by Democrats right now than Republicans. I think the head of the Democrat National Committee made that statement like 3 months ago at a big Democrat rally or something they were having. So the same people who say that's hate speech approve the trusted flaggers, who then tell the platforms what they can and can't have on their platform. And if they don't agree with what the trusted flaggers say, there's civil penalties. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Both under national law and the DSA, investigations begin, and there's a whole process that can result in enforcement and then ultimately crippling fines for companies.
And those crippling fines, those civil penalties can be what, 5%, 10% of global revenue, depending on the Online Services Act or the DSA?
Under the DSA, 6%.
6%? Wow, that's a lot of money because these are big companies, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, Mr. Farage, it's not just civil penalties, though. And this is where it gets really scary. Because my understanding is there's criminal penalties, and I think in 2023 in the United Kingdom, there were 12,183 arrests for offensive posts. 12,000 people arrested for things they posted online that some trusted flagger approved by the government, the same government that says what's being said at the Democrat National Committee, we need to take back our country, is hate speech. That's a scary scenario. Is that right?
Yeah, they're massive statistics, and I mean, some of it comes under non-crime hate incidents. So you've said something on social media, someone's taken objection, and you get the knock at the door from the police sort of warning you that if you do this again, something may happen. And this has now been broadened out. I mean, Mr. Price made the point, what is hate speech? How do you define hate speech? And that's the problem, isn't it, with all of these laws, that we finish up in a position where local police forces, etc., have to choose their own interpretations. I think, again, as I said to you earlier, the timing of this hearing today is perfect because the head of the Metropolitan Police, who arrested Graham Lenhan at Heathrow Airport, he's thrown the ball back now to the British Home Secretary and the government to say, please tell us, what is this law intended? What are we supposed as the police to do? So I think we're going to have a much more rapid debate about this. But my worry is it may get worse, if I may quickly. because the Labour government now are intending to pass a law that has a definition of Islamophobia. They're intending to put that into law. And that effectively will mean that criticism of a religion, mocking of a religion, would become an offence. And that's totally against everything.
Well,
because we've always given the Pope a hard time. We've always given the Archbishop of Canterbury a hard time. So we're finishing up kind of with two-tier law and two-tier justice.
Well,
and that's very concerning.
I had one other question I'd like to get from maybe you and Mr. Price, if I could. Speaking of religion, tell me what performative prayer is. This is something we've seen and we've discovered in our investigative work. Maybe we'll start with Mr. Price, then go to Mr. Farage.
Yes, sir. We have a client at the moment who's been prosecuted or who was arrested in Bristol for a Christian pastor preaching about the differences between Christianity and Islam. He was then assaulted by a group of people identifying as Islamic people. The police arrived and they arrested him, not the people who assaulted him. This is the state of play in the United Kingdom in terms of free speech. And unfortunately, across Europe, I mean, I have a whole file of cases here where people have been arrested for criticisms of Islam, where they've been prosecuted. So things are getting pretty bad.
Yeah, that extends to abortion clinics, doesn't it? And the abortion debate in Britain and Europe is different to the abortion debate in America. It's in a different place. But we have seen people warned or arrested if they've been seen to be praying outside abortion clinics, even if they're doing it silently. Hence, it's performative in the sense they're doing that. And you know, I'm afraid you now have to be a certain distance away from one of these clinics. But if other members of the public object and say that your praying there is causing them psychological harm, well, the police may intervene.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I comment on one of these issues very briefly?
I'm fine if the ranking member, okay. I may have to ask you a question after you comment. When you do that, go ahead.
I realize I'm opening the door.
Yeah.
I just wanted to note on this question of what is hate speech. First off, the question of identifying hate speech is not something that happens in a vacuum. In the UK, in Europe, there are very strict rules around the definition of hate speech that connect it not merely to speech, but to incitement. So it's incitement to violence or hatred or discrimination. And I think that's just an important baseline point, that this isn't just about pure speech, it's about the kind of speech that might lead to violence. And related to that, when you mentioned this hypothetical of take back our country, and is that hate speech? My understanding is that that came up in the context of a hypothetical related to persistent harassment of a Muslim girl. And that was the hypothetical. And the question was, in that particular context, did that constitute a kind of incitement to some violence against this young girl? So I think it's important to put some of these kinds of abstract questions into that kind of context.
Professor, did you agree with the Biden administration when they established the Disinformation Governance Board?
I didn't take a position on that. I do think that disinformation is an issue that
the government should be deciding what we can say and what we can't?
Absolutely not.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I'll give the ranking member a little extra time if he so desires. With that, I'll recognize the gentleman from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And firstly, I was pleased to join on the Codell, and it was a very fine, good Codell. I appreciate the chair, my friend and my classmate from 2006. One of the things I found most heartening about the Codell, we had a tour of Parliament, and along with us were two conservative members who were, I think they were either in House of Lords, maybe one was in the Lords and one was in the House of Commons, but they talked to us about Magna Carta and about how it's the basis of our laws, and there was a copy there and copies here and there and whatever, but how precious the Magna Carta is. And they suggested to us that a legislator, this was in the House of Lords where he spoke, that a legislator is not somebody who votes. A legislator's job is not just to vote. A legislator's job is to stand up to an out-of-control executive. Very telling for British Parliament members to instruct us on what we should be doing, and I thank him for that. I'm a strong supporter of free speech and always have been, but I find this hearing a bit disingenuous because of the problems we have here in America. Free speech includes the speech of those with whom we disagree, people who say vile things, and in my case, I find racist and anti-Semitic and Islamophobic type speech is something I find foul, but it's protected by free speech and offensive speech as well. That does not mean that there aren't limitations, however, and speech can be harmful, dangerous, and infringe on other people's rights. It isn't a free-for-all, though. And the U.S. and our First Amendment does not have a monopoly on what constitutes free speech. There is speech protected by the First Amendment, like corporate political donations, which I think is misplaced and misapplied. And there are times when our legal system itself suppresses disfavored speech. I passed the Speech Act in the 111th Congress. I think Mr. Issa was my co-sponsor, and it dealt with the fact that Britain is a favored nation for defamation actions, and it's easy to get a defamation judgment there. We would not allow those judgments to be recognized here in our country under the Speech Act if the activities that took place did not conform to our laws on free speech. And I would think Mr. Farage could try to look at changing their laws on defamation and contour more to what we see in the First Amendment, and that might be good for the people in England. Two of my good friends, most revered friends, were from England, London, Christopher Hitchens and Sir Bill Browder. And they've written books, and they could be subject to such laws as well. But work on protecting your English authors. Who, from Shakespeare on, they've been pretty good. We used to be bipartisan in these efforts to look out for free speech, but President Trump has taken on free speech in ways that would never been thought about. And I think Mr. Lofgren brought some points to Professor Kay. And it's not just laws, it's autocratic actions as well. President Trump, as Mr. Dalio said clearly, but so many other people have said it and felt it, is bringing us on the verge of an autocratic state. And his actions in trying to bring law firms to their knees, colleges to their knees, federal employees, students, et cetera, is anti-free speech, anti-opportunity, and fear for themselves and their futures if they speak out. Even congresspeople could be subject in the future, I'm sure, with some of the ways we're seeing this Justice Department act with questions about their speech. Our president has sued every broadcasting company almost, and they've gone after CNN, they've gone after NBC, and they pick some of these fringe people to pick on the Ukrainian president about his attire. It's bizarre what's going on in our country, and I'm concerned. They try to silence and shake down those who don't conform to whatever the president thinks. We need to understand that his review of the Smithsonian exhibits and other African-American museum and saying there was too much emphasis on how bad slavery was. I don't know how you could find anything good about slavery, and Edwin Starr, who's a singer, would tell you slavery, like war, there's absolutely nothing good about it. So we shouldn't be trying to. Professor Kay, how would you compare, from your expertise, how we evaluate and compare with relative states of freedom of expression written in the United States? Where do you see the comparisons?
Well, I think right now we're at a very dismal place in the United States, but I do think that it's also worth thinking a bit about some of the issues that Mr. Farage raised. So, for example, he mentioned the issue of a law against Islamophobia, but there's also a lot of discussion about laws against anti-Semitism and against other attacks on people on their status, on the basis of their religion and so forth. Those are actually valuable conversations to have. But you can't just sort of pick and choose which censorship or which restrictions are okay and which are not. You really need to have a general view as to what's appropriate. And I think, again, the chairman's point about censorship being a focus on criticism is the appropriate one. And to the extent that we can make that comparison, which country is really doing more, or which countries are really doing more to tamp down, to silence critics, that's the harm to our democracy. And right now I see that more in the United States than I see in Europe or the UK.
Thank you, Professor. And I'd just like to say to you, welcome. I have a lot of British friends and respect for Britain. I have a great time when I'm there, but I'm happy we won the war.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, the statement that Trump is bringing us to the edge of being an autocratic state in and of itself disproves the premise of that statement. Think about that. It's absurd. Under the First Amendment, the general proposition is that government should not be regulating the content of its citizens' speech. You have the opposing idea that it's the responsibility of government to decide not only what its citizens should think, but what content they are allowed to see and engage with. To some, the reality of the government regulation of speech may sound like it's a distant, authoritarian notion that won't come to the United States of America, but I would ask you to just think back again. I'm reminded of Orwell's 1984. Think of the memory hole that people are trying to memory hole right now, some even on this panel, sir, who don't want you to realize how bad a government can be when it attempts to censor right here in the United States. For instance, President Obama, this is from an article I'd asked unanimous consent. President Obama has been the most aggressive administration in history, not only going after whistleblowers, but after pursuing reporters who write their stories. How about this one, the Biden legacy? How about this whole stack, and I'll put these in just a second. It's convenient to memory hole what the Biden administration did, what they did to suppress dissent and contrary opinion. I'll get into that in a second. The actions of European governments show that the type of censorship by government is not only possible, but very much doable. Under the guise of public safety, government officials in Europe have suppressed and arrested individuals who have simply engaged in political speech that is arbitrarily deemed to be unspeakable by the government. This kind of regime doesn't just appear on the scene, though. It takes time to develop. And we've seen it here, and that's why I'm taking this opportunity to remind you that FISA must be reformed. FISA must be reformed. So, Mr. Price, you alluded to this. And so I have this document right here that compares the GDP growth of EU versus the US 1998 to 2023. And the US has grown about 87%, almost 90%. The EU has increased its GDP by about 13%. So you have almost a 6x variable there. The question is, when you set these kind of draconian fines, and you set up a system that is amorphous and almost indefinable, might it not also have some more than just even the safety, ostensible safety of the society? Might it lead to trying to regulate when you can't innovate?
I think that's very much the case, sir. We've seen it not just in the area of speech, but obviously, as we were discussing, the Digital Markets Act, data protection, and so on. And Europe is facing some very serious structural problems demographically, financially. And a lot of what I think is inspiring the DSA is what we saw from Germany beginning after the election of President Trump and after Brexit, which is to control the narrative, slow down speech. And into that, then, they're throwing a very wide net out that's affecting all kinds of legitimate speech. We talked about my client Päivi Räsänen in Finland, who's prosecuted for sharing a tweet from the Bible. It's absolutely outrageous. And that becomes now the standard that the DSA will set, not just for Europe, but possibly and predictably globally.
And similarly, Mr. Reid, that's what's going to happen to your app innovators. They're not going to be able to have access to 440 million people in a marketplace in Europe without having to go through essentially government censorship.
Well, I think you hit it earlier when you said that their focus has been on regulating or adding legislation. And it isn't one piece of regulation or one piece of legislation that has caused problems for our innovators, both in the UK, in the EU, and in America. It's been the stacking effect. Because if you start with one regulation, you say, I can handle that, I'll build that into my business. It's when you have one, then two, then four, then six. So what's been the biggest problem for growth has been their answer is that old quip, the beatings will continue until morale improves. We often feel that way about regulation. Innovation will get regulated until we get more innovation, and I don't think that will work out.
Thanks, Mr. Reid. Now, under Biden, as Trump vows to ban censorship cartel. This one, how the FBI violated the privacy rights of tens of thousands of Americans. This one, Inspector General report on FBI's FISA abuse tells us one thing: we need radical reform. This one, UK comedy writer Graham Linehan arrested over social media posts criticizing trans activists. Why did Lucy Connolly receive a 31-month sentence for Southport tweet? Policing thought crime should have no place in the UK. Britain's emerging police state. Knock, knock, it's the thought police. As thousands of criminals go uninvestigated, detectives call on a grandmother. Her crime, she went on Facebook to criticize labor counselors. This one, UK steps up free speech crackdown as armed police arrest comedy writer Graham Linehan at Heathrow Airport. And this one, Britain's new thought police, how labor plans to police your online speech. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We bet, without objection.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to offer 2 unanimous consent requests. I'm not going to challenge the farce as much as the gentleman and the others, but 2 that record letters to you, one to you and one to Commissioner Verkunen, pushing back on the framing of this hearing from 30 EU and US academics.
Thank you. Without objection. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Farage, welcome to the United States of America. This isn't your first time here, correct?
Correct.
You were here in 2024 in Milwaukee, weren't you?
I've been coming here since 1982 on a very regular basis. I work for American companies.
What
for many,
purpose
many
were
years.
you coming to Milwaukee for? Why did you come to Milwaukee?
I've been in Milwaukee many times. I think that particular
in
event
2024
was a
was
convention.
the convention, the Republican
I think
convention.
that's right. I think you're right.
The Trump convention.
I think you're right. Very good.
Where Trump was coronated.
Well, he won, didn't he? I mean, yes,
he had
that's
already
what
won.
happens,
We already
you
knew
know,
who had won.
It's called political
and it was
parties.
his coronation, and you attended, and you also attended Trump rallies, correct?
I've attended lots of Trump rallies.
Make America Great Again rallies,
yes.
many of them. And you
upbeat,
publicly,
optimistic, happy, wonderful, joyous
you
events.
publicly
yes.
endorsed his...
I've thoroughly enjoyed them. I've even spoken of
You endorsed him for president, and you attended his election night watch party.
I did.
And you consider Trump to be your mentor, correct?
No.
He's not your mentor?
No.
But
Sorry.
He is somebody who you want the support of, and you have the support.
Yes, I do. I think he's a very, very brave man.
Because you are getting ready to run for Prime Minister of Great Britain, correct?
Oh, I've been trying for years, yeah.
And as it stands right now, you head up a party. How many seats in the Parliament are there?
651,
650,
if you include the Speaker, that is.
650.
Yes.
And how many seats does your party hold?
How many seats do the opinion polls say we're going to get next time? Is that your question?
I mean,
I
the
see.
numbers don't lie. You only have 4 seats, right?
I'm afraid so, yes.
And so you are indeed the leader of a fringe party.
Oh, I'm a fringe, all right. Don't worry about that. Yes, absolutely. Everything I've ever done.
And as a fringe party leader seeking to run for Prime Minister of Great Britain, you need a lot of money in order to blow up like the MAGA movement has blown up.
What you need is a message of truth and a message of hope. And
well, you need money also, right?
Well, money's helpful, but it's not the primary thing you need.
So the first thing that came out of the chair's mouth this morning during his opening statement had to do with Elon Musk.
Yeah.
And you're carrying water for Elon Musk today, aren't you?
From what I can see, Elon Musk is abusive about me virtually every single week. But it's a free country, so
well, I mean, but you never stop trying to ingratiate yourself with him.
Wrong.
Well, I mean,
wrong.
You are familiar with the fact.
Wrong. I have.
You are familiar with the fact,
public,
Mr. Farage,
I have had a public fallout with Elon Musk.
That Donald Trump's campaign benefited to the extent of $250 million from Elon Musk.
Well, I mean, how much?
You are familiar with that, correct?
How much did Mr. Zuckerberg give to the Democrats? I mean, this is what happens, and people are.
Well, he didn't give any money
on Musk. Let me be clear.
To the Democrats. He was sitting behind Trump with the rest of the tech bros, and you are here today to impress all of those tech bros, including Elon Musk. Isn't that correct?
I'm going to answer your question. very, very honestly.
You need money from Elon Musk in order to get elected Prime Minister of Great Britain. That's the bottom line. Isn't that correct?
We consider all day, as long as the chairman allows us. I don't mind. I had a very public falling out with Elon Musk.
But you're still trying to get some money from him, though.
Over a political issue.
It's not about the prior disputes.
I'm sorry,
you're trying to ingratiate yourself with the tech bros by coming over here and
can I get a cup of coffee or something?
And you're arguing.
We'll be here a long time.
What you're arguing is that the citizens of Great Britain should pay a tariff if these tech companies are not allowed to violate the laws of Great Britain.
No, I'm not. That was a falsehood put out by the British Prime Minister today.
You didn't say in your
Prime Minister's
statement.
questions. I have never.
In your statement.
I have never suggested any of the kind.
You don't call
My statement
for
is very
tariffs
clear.
as tools to
My
force
statement is
Great
very
Britain.
clear. My statement is very.
You are not
It
calling
might surprise
for,
you.
You are not
Mr.
calling
Johnson.
for.
It might surprise you to know
tariffs and trade sanctions.
Trade. You may not know this, but trade between our countries is actually rather important. You are the biggest investor in our country, and we're the biggest investor in yours.
Time of the gentleman from Georgia has expired, but the gentleman should be able to say some kind of response.
Here to the United
Regular
States
order, Mr. Chairman.
He's
been rude, he's been disgusting, he's been hilarious.
Hang on. No. The gentleman's time has expired. I feel like we should give Mr. Farage a chance to respond to one of the many questions he was not allowed to respond to. So we'll give you 30 seconds, Mr. Farage, and then we'll move on to our next one. Because I know Mr. Farage does have to leave in about an hour, so we want to get through as many members as we can.
Number one, I had a public fallout over a political issue with Elon Musk. I can't be bullied by anybody. I haven't changed my mind. Last time I looked, he was being spectacularly rude about me yesterday. That's life. If we believe in free speech, we live with it. What I have made very clear.
Fixated on.
What I've made. Sorry, no, this is my turn, I think.
Yeah, you got another
Thank
15
you, Mr.
seconds.
Chairman. What I've made perfectly clear in this paper is the situation we've got with successive pieces of legislation, including now the Online Safety Act, is a danger to trade between our countries. And allies and friends and trading partners have honest conversations with each other. I hope many American companies and politicians have honest conversations with the British government. I've not suggested sanctions at all in any way.
Good luck on your race.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd remind my colleague from Georgia that President Trump was openly nominated after decisively winning the primary votes across the country. That's in open contrast to the Democratic nominee, who has decreed the nominee of her party in spite of the fact she did not receive a single primary vote. So I would be a little careful if I were him about talking about coronations. I do agree with my Democratic colleagues that we need to be on guard against suppression of free speech, whether it's coming from the left or the right. But I disagree with them that the chief executive regulating the executive branch's communications or conforming executive agencies and grantees to executive policy is somehow a threat to free speech. The executive branch is designed to speak with one voice, a voice chosen every 4 years by the people. And I disagree with them that suing for defamation is an infringement on speech in a legal system where the truth is an absolute defense. The threat to democracy is from the government regulating other people's communications. Now, we're now discovering that the Biden administration used the FBI to pressure tech companies to censor the communications of the American people over a free discussion of everything from COVID policy and origins, the Russian collusion hoax, Biden family influence peddling, climate change. I myself was the victim of this censorship when I warned of the damage that the COVID lockdowns were causing. Now, democracy assumes that the best way to separate truth from lies, or wisdom from folly, or good from evil, or love from hate, is to place the two of them side by side and then trust the common sense and good judgment of the people to know the difference. But this assumes that the people have full and unfettered freedom to express themselves and to challenge the claims and opinions of each other. Now, some of our colleagues seem to be suggesting that we should transfer that prerogative from the people to the government. That's the very definition of authoritarianism. Mr. Farage, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we are, as citizens, We should be free to make our minds up, to express our opinions, to a large extent to make our own mistakes, provided, and we all know there's a limit to free speech. You know, the professor talked about incitement earlier, and of course, you know, we would be absolutely joined together on that. We don't want incitement, we don't accept incitement, and if people put out something irrational or insightful, but very quickly put their hands up and apologize and learn their lesson, that's kind of how the world is. I do not want government to be the arbiter of what I should think.
We have a word for that. It's demos kratis, rule by the people.
So yes,
democracy.
I'm with you on that. I also agree with you that COVID, I touched on this earlier, it was during COVID when rational debate about many important issues, be it mask wearing, be it lockdowns, rational debate on these things was frankly stamped out, and this was supported by big social media companies, many, not GB News obviously, but many TV stations, etc. It's a very dark period that we're coming out of.
In this country, what we're discovering is that was being done under pressure by the FBI, directed by the executive branch of the government under Joe Biden. But just briefly, how did this happen to the UK and the EU, and what lessons should we be drawing here today?
Well, we joined the EU half a century ago, or the EEC as it was then called. It was a huge mistake, in my opinion. We forgot about common law, the kind of law that you guys have always enjoyed too. We sort of gradually transferred to a European way of thinking. We incorporated a Human Rights Act, which kind of meant really that, you know, as opposed to being born free, under a human rights regime, the state gives you your rights, for which you're supposed to be incredibly grateful, but they can take them away whenever they like. So we lost our bearings. The UK lost its way. It became obsessed about doing things a European way, countries, frankly, that don't have that history of liberty, freedom, and democracy that we do.
Finally, what do you see as the shape of things to come? Are we going to regain these freedoms or lose them?
Well, ultimately, the people have to get what they vote for. And one of the reasons that we are seeing an extraordinary political revolution that is happening in parts of Europe, and if you believe the polls, what is happening in the United Kingdom right now is we want a government that comes in and gets rid of all these laws and starts again. And starts on the basis, yes, we want to try and protect kids, and we will do whatever we can that is practical to protect kids from serious harm online. But we will get back to the idea that I could insult you, you could insult me, Mr. Raskin and I can have our chats, but we do it, you know, in a spirit that's not insightful and in a way that honors those who built our great countries. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Well done. The gentlelady from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, it wasn't too long ago that Democrats and Republicans on this committee together agreed to undertake a 16-month investigation into the anti-competitive practices of big tech companies. I represent many of them in Seattle, and proposed bipartisan legislation, which actually passed this committee, to restore fairness and competition for consumers and small businesses. That included the American Choice and Innovation Online Act, or ACOIA, which included similar common sense structural solutions to what the EU included in the Digital Markets Act. And it was a real recognition that these big tech companies are squelching competition and innovation, and that hurts consumers. It's a big turnaround then that suddenly the Republican majority wants to do something as absurd as use trade negotiations to help bolster big tech in Europe when EU has undertaken the very smart solutions that fight back against big tech monopolies and protect consumers and small businesses. Maybe it's linked to the fact that these big tech companies are now pouring money into Donald Trump's campaign funds. I don't know. Maybe it's because they're making all kinds of deals to screw consumers and preference giant corporations in exchange for campaign contributions and a 24-karat gold plaque to Donald Trump, like the CEO of Apple just recently did. It seems to me that the Republican Party has suddenly turned its back on small businesses, on competition, on innovation, and yes, even on free speech, which is apparently the topic of discussion today. In fact, one of our witnesses here claims to represent, one of the Republican witnesses claims to represent small and medium-sized app developers, but his organization gets more than half of its funding from Apple. the very giant corporation that those same small and medium-sized app developers are trying to fight. Make it make sense for me. Now we have this hearing centered around so-called free speech and so-called censorship. Not here in America, but in Europe. Well, what about right here at home on US soil, the censorship by the Trump administration, the Republican Party, on anything that they don't agree with? Let's just take a recent example. Rameza Öztürk, a PhD student at Tufts University, wrote an op-ed in the student newspaper calling for the university to divest from Israel. It was a simple exercise of her First Amendment free speech rights. She committed no crime, she didn't bully or harass anyone, she didn't incite violence towards anyone. Action was totally peaceful. And yet, what happened? In March, the Trump administration revoked her student visa, sent masked men to kidnap and disappear her, forcing her into an unmarked car, and detained her for 45 days. Professor Kaye, how does this kind of abuse, utilizing the immigration system, in this case for now, can extend to US citizens, to green card holders, to anyone else? How does this hinder the free speech rights of all Americans?
Well, we've seen already that American citizens have been caught in the enforcement of immigration laws over the last, and outside of the immigration laws over the last several months. But I think we can look at it from two perspectives. I mean, one is it's a clear violation of a student's free speech right, as you just explained it, when they're detained and set up for deportation solely because of an op-ed that they wrote. But it's also an intimidation for anybody who would write anything further. Anybody who's in that same kind of visa situation now is not going to be writing that op-ed. And that's not just a harm to them, that's not just chilling their speech. That's also a harm to all of us who would benefit from hearing those kinds of views.
In fact, right now, the Trump administration is reviewing all social media of visa applicants to see if they've posted any anti-Trump or pro-Palestinian sentiments. How does that affect our free speech rights?
Well, it's the same answer. It's a deterioration of our public debate in this country. It's exactly this kind of, I think that Mr. McClintock had said before, putting side by side different ideas. And that's an interference with that.
So quickly, another example. In June, a Spanish-language reporter named Mario Guevara was live streaming a gathering of Americans protesting against Trump's immigration policy. The police arrested him on bogus misdemeanor charges that were later dropped. A few days later, he was detained by ICE. Now we've got a government that arrests a student for writing an op-ed, filters the speech of visitors, and arrests a journalist for covering a protest. How does that compare to free speech practices of other countries?
Well, it does compare with authoritarians who regularly use law enforcement in order to transform journalism into a crime. This is a major global censorship problem, and we're seeing it in Georgia. And we see it in this context that is not just a one-off. It's part of, I think, a systemic approach to a free media in this country. That's one, and perhaps the harshest example, because I understand that the journalist remains in detention, but it's part of a systemic approach, I think.
Similar to Russia and China, places like that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. I have some unanimous consent requests.
Do you want to go now, or do you?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you. I ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the Open Markets Institute.
Without objection.
Another one, a letter from the Tech Freedom Association raising concerns with the FTC's inquiry on censorship.
Without objection.
And a final one from I think it's the App Association, and it's titled, Apple is top funder of lobby group that says it represents small developers.
Yeah. Without objection. If I could,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I have one more here.
Okay, go right ahead.
This is an article entitled The False Choice Between Digital Regulation and Innovation.
Without objection.
Thank you. I yield back.
Quickly, Mr. Reid, is your association fighting Apple?
Pardon me?
Is your association Fighting Apple's what the...
Fighting Apple?
Fighting Apple?
We disagree with Apple on multiple issues, as well as for all of our sponsors. Our membership is the small businesses that many of you have met when we've had our fly-in every year.
Okay, great. Seems to me your association uses Apple. That's where your apps go. I don't think you're fighting Apple. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 5 minutes.
Professor Kay, was the Centers for Disease Control correct in 2020 about the handling of COVID? You know, the chairman laid out all the things that we now know are debunked. Was the Center for Disease Control correct in how they went about their business?
I'm not a scientist, so I can't speak to that. I mean, I remember the time, like we all did, a time of great fear as
shutting
to what was
down
happening.
schools, things like that, that have set kids behind. See, because it's to Representative McClintock's point that wouldn't this administration want to change some people that you talked about that are in the Department of Health Services? Shouldn't they change them if they were wrong about really the seminal issue that has come before this generation? Shouldn't they change those people?
Well, that's just not my understanding of why people have been.
Are you familiar, Professor Kay, with the case Berenson versus Biden, which is a censorship case where Alex Berenson, a reporter, was deplatformed on Twitter?
I'm not familiar with that one.
I would suggest that you take a look at that because the Biden administration weaponized themselves against Mr. Berenson and stifled his speech on Twitter. What college are you a professor at again?
University of California, Irvine.
How many classes are you teaching this semester?
This I teach one class right now.
One class this semester. Mr. Farage, I want to thank you so much for coming to the great state of Wisconsin, of which I represent part of it, including Milwaukee. I hope you had a good time there.
I've always had a good time in Milwaukee, no question. Wonderful breweries, friendly people, love it.
You're welcome back anytime. I want to thank the ranking member for giving us a tutorial on free speech. Mr. Farage, did you instruct anyone on this panel, including the chairman, to instruct us to stifle the ranking member's speech? Did you?
No, absolutely not. Of course not.
Can you comment on the key issue before the far right that we heard about earlier? What is that key issue in Europe right now that the far right is heavily engaged in?
Well, if you're in the United, I'll speak for the United Kingdom. If you're opposed to illegal immigration on a mass scale and the huge cost to the taxpayer and the risk to our communities, then and if you like the flag, our national flag, then apparently you're far right.
So that illegal immigration issue that was very informative to the election in 2024 in America, the same thing is happening in Europe? Is that accurate?
It's a very similar argument in many, many ways, and therefore the definition of far right, I think, now applies to about 2/3 of the British population.
So I think about someone who's very famous from your country, Ms. J.K. Rowling, who wrote one of the finest series of books, the Harry Potter series, that has ever been in print, who I believe is self-defined as a liberal, as we call them in America. Hasn't she even been threatened for a position she's taken in regards to transgenderism?
Yes, she very much comes from a liberal wing of politics historically, but she's taken a view that women should be safe in women's spaces. That means changing rooms, etc. That's all she said. And by the way, that's something that our Supreme Court recently actually did back up, the fact that there are fundamental differences. And this is not to launch an attack on anyone that's trans, just to bring some common sense in. And she has faced cancel culture and abuse on a huge scale.
I would just, one other comment in regards to the ranking member's opening statement. He was saying that we are stifling speech here in America, including PBS, by defunding them. I would suggest that the ranking member look at the news that came out in the past week. It is very good news for PBS, where the Ford Foundation and other foundations have said they're going to put in tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, to make sure that they stay on the air. Protecting the American taxpayer, I think that is a great thing that we were able to do with the One Big Beautiful Bill. Final question for Mr. Price. How is the problem going to be fixed, and can America help?
Yes, America can help. The spotlight that has already been shone on the problem by the administration, by the amazing work that this committee is doing here is hugely welcome by those of us who support the human right to free speech. We have people who are suffering under prosecutions, unjust prosecutions in Europe right now. I've outlined a lot of them in my written submissions, and it's only because of the support that's coming from this side of the Atlantic that we're able to see possibly a brighter future.
And we will continue those efforts.
Thank you.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman, yield back. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, when I was a professor of constitutional law, I used to teach my students that freedom of speech is like an apple, and everybody wants to take just one bite out of the apple. Somebody doesn't like left-wing speech. There's a bite. Somebody doesn't like right-wing speech. Somebody doesn't like feminist speech. Somebody doesn't like sexist speech. And everybody just wants to take one bite. But if we let everybody take a bite, at the end of the day, there's no apple left. It's all gone. So if you want to defend free speech and you want a society that's defined by free speech, you've got to accept even the speech you oppose, the speech that you abhor. Now, Professor Kaye, we want to try to bring some objectivity to the conversation. I looked up the Reporters Without Borders rankings of every country in the world according to press freedom. Norway was #1. North Korea was number 179. It's like a totalitarian dungeon. The UK was number 20. The US was number 57 under Trump, down from 45, where it was before. Russia, which some people here lionize, was at 171, right? So if we were going to undertake a serious study of the state of press freedom all over the world, for example, where should our focus be?
I appreciate that question. I have a very long list that I could highlight.
But just tell us methodologically, quickly, how we should go about doing it if we wanted to undertake this in a serious way.
Absolutely. I mean, I would really use the lens of what do we need as a democracy in order to be well-informed, in order to make choices about our democracy, to make choices about our health. What do we need? We need an open press. We need open government. We need access. We absolutely don't want to see websites scrubbed, as this administration has done. So I would look at it through that lens, through the lens of what we need in order to have a democracy.
Gotcha. Mr. Farage, first of all, to be called charming by you, a man of your evident erudition and dazzling brilliance, is undoubtedly a Lifetime Achievement Award for me, so I will hold it closely. But I wanted to ask you about your commitment to the freedom of speech universally. I think it's a principle that you advocate for everyone, not just for people who are in your party or people you agree with. You said that there should not have been a protest against the Gaza war in the UK. And then when it went ahead, the police refused to shut it down. You called them gutless for not shutting it down. Do you regret having opposed that, given that there was no violence there and there were 700,000 people who wanted to express themselves that day?
I have not opposed people standing up and protesting in favor of people living in Gaza at all. There was one particular day, and it was the Sunday nearest November the 11th, which was when we had big memorial services in London, and I think a march being allowed to go ahead on that day would have been a mistake. Any other day, fine.
Oh, I see. Who gets to decide that?
Well, I think actually something that is embedded in the country, something that is absolutely fundamental to vote.
That's why we have a written constitution. You might take that idea back to the UK with you.
Well,
because the freedom of speech applies 365 days a year here under the First Amendment, not 364 or 363, depending on some politicians heckling the government and telling them to shut down free speech.
We have allowed mass pro-Gaza demonstrations in London, weekend after weekend.
No thanks to you. All right, let me change.
This was
let me try another one.
Particularly sensitive day. That's all.
I got you. It was a sensitive day. And I thought that's what the freedom of speech was about. You have a right to engage in speech that other people consider offensive or insensitive. But in any event, you've made yourself clear, Mr. Farage.
64 days a year if they want.
You've made yourself clear to your constituents in Claxton today. Let me ask you this. You've banned journalists from your political events that you disagree with, haven't you?
No, in fact, I'm the only political
Really?
leader
At your
in Britain.
convention, you didn't ban journalists and revoke their credentials?
You know, I take the average press conference, I take 25 questions.
No, that wasn't my question. Mr. Farage, we're politicians, so we see what you're doing. I'm asking you a direct question.
Well, thank you. I'm very pleased
I'm asking you a direct question, and I hope you can answer it. Why do you ban journalists who oppose your views from coming to your events? Why did you tell your party why did you tell the local government not to do interviews with your local newspaper?
I am the most open person to any journalist.
Undoubtedly, you're the handsomest man in the world. But I'm asking you a different question, okay? That's not my question. My question for you is, and it's legit, why do you ban journalists that you disagree with from your political events, like from your convention?
I don't.
Okay, and you say you've never done that?
I can't think, if I go back the last 25 years, I can't think of banning anybody. But I mean, maybe somebody else did. But look,
I see. It was somebody else who did it.
I take more questions.
All right.
From journalists.
Do you have
all
any
the other
objections?
leaders added up together.
Okay, Mr. Price, let me ask you. You're an honest man. Do you have any objection to the things you've heard about what Donald Trump is doing in the United States of America, going after law firms, for example, banning them from federal buildings and federal courthouses, stripping them of security clearance, saying they can never get federal jobs or contracts because he doesn't like something one of the lawyers at the firm did? Do you think there's a First Amendment problem with that, as our courts have found?
There's a lot of information you've put into that. It's good to talk to you again after London.
Yeah, have you followed that at all?
I haven't. I have to be perfectly honest with you now.
Okay, do you have any problems with anything Donald Trump has done with respect to free speech and freedom of expression in America? Or you just haven't followed it?
I'm not as well. There are plenty of people here better informed on American matters than I.
And we are. So thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence. I yield back.
I think the gentleman, my guess is Mr. Farage takes press questions probably as often as President Trump does. These are two guys who aren't afraid to talk to the press and take any question that comes to them. We've seen that displayed time and time again. The gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it was an honor to be with you and the ranking member as we had the chance to see firsthand what's going on in the EU and in the UK. Maybe this Raskin-Farage show could become a recurring event. It's gotten very interesting on both occasions. But I'd actually like to direct my questions to you, Mr. Price, at first. It's good to see you again. I think that those of us on the trip were really alarmed by the ways in which the tide is turning against free speech in the UK and the EU. And I think that there actually was quite a bit of bipartisan agreement among the members of our delegation on a number of these issues. So I was hoping you could give us a little context of what you think explains this. And I think